Welcome, my friends. Sit and listen to the tale of brave pioneers, starting out in Oklahoma in 1889 and facing dark supernatural powers. The story is told by a doctor in an asylum after showing the strange creature in room B116. Walker and Audrey are young pioneers travelling to Oklahoma to start their lives afresh. When Audrey uncovers a nest of rattlesnakes on their journey, she kills them with disastrous consequences on both their lives. All in The Curse of Yig. To continue to make content, we need to grow. So please like, subscribe, but just as importantly, comment and share. The algorithm must be fed, or else it will consume the channel, and comments are one of its favourite meals. Only you can feed it. In part 2, Walker and Audrey reach Oklahoma and start to build a new home. Come, sit, watch and listen as it's time to enter the Cave of Chronicles. On the 22nd evening of the journey, a savage wind made it imperative, for the sake of the mules, to camp in as sheltered a spot as possible, and Audrey persuaded her husband to take advantage of a cliff which rose uncommonly high above the dried bed of a former tributary of the Canadian River. He did not like the rocky cast of the place, but allowed himself to be overruled this once, leading the animals sullenly towards the protecting slope, which the nature of the ground would not allow the wagon to approach. Audrey, examining the rocks near the wagon, meanwhile noticed a singular sniffing on the part of the feeble old dog. Seizing a rifle, she followed his lead and presently thanked her stars that she had forestalled Walker in her discovery. For there, snugly nested in the gap between two boulders, was a sight it would have done him no good to see. Visible only as one convoluted expanse, but perhaps comprising as many as 3 or 4 separate units, was a mass of lazy wriggling which could not be other than the brood of newborn rattlesnakes. Anxious to save Walker from a trying shock, Audrey did not hesitate to act, but took the gun firmly by the barrel and brought the butt down again and again upon the writhing objects. Her own sense of loathing was great, but it did not mount to a real fear. Finally, she saw that her task was done, and turned to cleanse the improvised bludgeon in the red sand and dry dead grass nearby. She must, she reflected, cover the nest before Walker got back from tethering the mules. Old Wolf, tottering relic of a mixed shepherd and coyote ancestry that he was, had vanished, and she feared he had gone to fetch his master. Footsteps at that instant provided her fear well-founded. A second more, and Walker had seen everything. Audrey made a move to catch him, as if he should faint, but he did no more than sway. Then the look of pure fright on his bloodless face turned slowly to something like mingled awe and anger, and he began to unbraid his wife in trembling tones. "God's sake, Ard, but why'd you go do for that? Ain't ye heard about all the things they've been telling about the snake devil Yig? Ye ought to have told me and we'd have moved on. Don't ye know there's a devil god what gets even if he hurts his children? What do ye think the Injuns all dances and beats their drums in the fall about? This land's under a curse, I tell ye. Nigh every soul we've talked to since we've come in has said the same. Yig rolls here, and he comes out every fall to get his victims and turn them into snakes. Why, Ard, they won't none of them Injuns across the Canadian kill a snake for love nor money. God knows what ye done to yourself, gal, stomping out a whole brood of Yig's chillun. He'll get ye sure, sooner or later, unless I can buy a charm offen some of the Injun medicine men. He'll get ye, Ard, as surely as there's a God in heaven. He'll come out of the night and turn ye into a crawling spotted snake." All the rest of the journey, Walker kept up the frightened reproofs and prophecies. They crossed the Canadian near Newcastle, and soon afterwards met with the first of the real Plains Indians. They had seen a party of blanketed Wichitas, whose leader talked freely under the spell of the whiskey offered him, and taught poor Walker a long-winded protective charm against Yig in exchange for a quart bottle of the same inspiring fluid. By the end of the week, the chosen site in the Wichita country was reached, and the Davises made haste to trace their boundaries and perform the spring ploughing before even beginning the construction of a cabin. The region was flat, drearily windy, and sparse of natural vegetation, but promised great fertility under cultivation. Occasional outcroppings of granite diversified a soil of decomposed red sandstone, and here and there a great flat rock would stretch along the surface of the ground like a man-made floor. There seems to be very few snakes or possible dens for them, so Audrey at last persuaded Walker to build the one-room cabin over a vast, smooth slab of exposed stone, with such a flooring and with a good-sized fireplace. The wettest weather might be defied, though it soon became evident that dampness was no salient quality of the district. Logs were hauled in the wagon from the nearest belt of woods, many miles towards the Wichita Mountains. Walker built his wide-chimneyed cabin and crude barn with the aid of the other settlers, though the nearest one was over a mile away. In turn, he helped his helpers at similar house raisings, so that many ties of friendship sprang up between the new neighbours. There was no town worthy of the name nearer than El Reno, on the railway station 30 miles or more to the northeast. And before many weeks had passed, the people of the section had become very cohesive, despite the wideness of their scattering. The natives, a few of whom had begun to settle down on ranches, were for the most part harmless, though somewhat quarrelsome when fired by the liquid stimulation which found its way to them despite all government bans. Of all the neighbours, the Davises found Joe and Sally Compton, who likewise hailed from Arkansas, the most helpful and congenial. Sally is still alive, known now as Grandma Compton, and her son Clyde, then an infant in arms, has become one of the leading men of the state. Sally and Audrey used to visit each other often, for their cabins were only 2 miles apart, and in the long spring and summer afternoons they exchanged many a tale of old Arkansas and many rumour about the new country. Sally was very sympathetic about Walker's weakness regarding snakes, but perhaps did more to aggravate than cure the parallel nervousness which Audrey was acquiring through his incessant praying and prophesying about the Curse of Yig. He was uncommonly full of gruesome snake stories and produced a direful strong impression with her acknowledged masterpiece, the tale of a man in Scott County who had been bitten by a whole horde of rattlers at once and had swelled so monstrously from poison that his body had finally burst with a pop. Needless to say, Audrey did not repeat this anecdote to her husband, and she implored the Comptons to beware of starting it on the rounds of the countryside. It is to Joe and Sally's credit that they heeded this plea with the utmost fidelity. Walker did his corn planting early, and in midsummer improved his time by harvesting a fair crop of the native grass of the region. With the help of Joe Compton, he dug a well which gave a moderate supply of very good water, though he planned to sink an artesian later on. He did not run into many serious snake scares and made his land as inhospitable as possible for wriggling visitors. Every now and then he rode over to the cluster of thatched chronicle huts which formed the main village of the Wichitas, and talked long with the old men and shamans about the snake god and how to nullify his wrath. Charms were always ready in exchange for whiskey, but much of the information he got was far from reassuring. Yig was a great god. He was bad medicine. He did not forget things. In the autumn, his children were very hungry and wild, and Yig was hungry and wild too. All the tribes made medicine against Yig when the corn harvest came. They gave him some corn and danced in proper regalia to the sound of whistle, rattle and drum. They kept on the drums pounding to drive Yig away and call down the aid of Tirawa, whose children men are, even as the snakes are Yig's children. It was bad that the squaw of Davis killed the children of Yig. Let Davis say the charms many times when the corn harvest comes. Yig is Yig. Yig is a great god. By the time the corn harvest did come, Walker had succeeded in getting his wife into a deplorably jumpy state. His prayers and borrowed incantations came to be a nuisance when the autumn rites of the natives began. There was always a distant wind-borne pounding of the tom-tom to lend an added background of the sinister. It was maddening to have the muffled clutter always stealing over the wide red plains. Why would it never stop? Day and night, week on week, it was always going in exhaustless relays as persistently as the red dusty winds that carried it. Audrey loathed it more than her husband did, for he saw in it a compensating element of protection. It was with this sense of a mighty, intangible bulwark against evil that he got in his crop and prepared cabin and stable for the coming winter. The autumn was abnormally warm, and except for their primitive cookery, the Davises found scant use for the stone fireplace Walker had built with such care. Something in the unnaturalness of the hot dust clouds preyed on the nerves of all the settlers, but most of all on Audrey's and Walker's. The notions of a hovering snake curse and the weird, endless rhythm of the distant native drums formed a bad combination, which any element of the bizarre went far to render utterly unendurable. Notwithstanding this strain, several festive gatherings were held at one or another of the cabins after the crops were reaped, keeping naively alive in modernity those curious rites of harvest home which are as old as human agriculture itself. Lafayette Smith, who came from southern Missouri, had a cabin about 3 miles east of Walker's and was a very passable fiddler, and his tunes did much to make the celebrants forget the monotonous beating of the distant tom-toms. Then Halloween drew near, and the settlers planned another frolic this time. Had they but known it of a lineage older even than agriculture, the dread witch Sabbath of the primal pre-Aryans, kept alive through ages in the midnight blackness of secret woods, and still hinting at vague terrors under its latter-day mask of comedy and lightness. Halloween was to fall on a Thursday, and the neighbours agreed to gather for their first revel in the Davis cabin. It was on that 31st of October that the warm spell broke. The morning was grey and leaden, and by noon the incessant winds had changed from searingness to rawness. People shivered all the more because they were not prepared for the chill, and Walker Davis's old dog, Wolf, dragged himself wearily indoors to a place beside the hearth. But the distant drums still thumped on, nor were the white citizenry less inclined to pursue their chosen rites. As early as 4 in the afternoon, the wagons began to arrive at Walker's cabin, and in the evening, after a memorable barbecue, Lafayette Smith's fiddle inspired a very fair-sized company to great feats of salutatory grotesqueness in the one good-sized but crowded room. The younger folk indulged in the amiable inanities proper to the season, and now and then old Wolf would howl a doleful and spine-tickling ominous at some especially spectral strain from Lafayette's squeaky violin, a device he had never heard before. Mostly, though, this battered veteran slept through the merriment, for he was past the age of active interests and largely lived in his dreams. Tom and Jenny Rigby had brought their collie, Zeke, along, but the canines did not fraternize. Zeke seemed strangely uneasy over something and nosed around curiously all the evening. Audrey and Walker made a fine couple on the floor, and Grandma Compton still likes to recall her impression of their dancing that night. Their worries seemed forgotten for the nonce, and Walker was shaved and trimmed into a surprising degree of spruceness. By 10 o'clock, all hands were healthily tired, and the guests began to depart, family by family, with many handshakings and bluff assurances of what a fine time everybody had had. Tom and Jenny thought Zeke's eerie howls as he followed them to their wagon were marks of regret at having to go home, though Audrey said it must be the faraway tom-toms which annoyed him, for the distant thumping was surely ghastly enough after the merriment within. The night was bitterly cold, and for the first time Walker put a great log in the fireplace and banked it with ashes to keep it smouldering till morning. Old Wolf dragged himself within the ruddy glow and lapsed into his customary coma. Audrey and Walker, too tired to think of charms or curses, tumbled into the rough pine bed and were asleep before the cheap alarm clock on the mantel had ticked out 3 minutes. And from far away, the rhythmic pounding of those hellish tom-toms still pulsed on the chill night wind. So ends part 2 of The Curse of Yig. In part 3, we have the dramatic conclusion when Walker and Audrey suffer the Curse of Yig. We currently release at least 3 episodes a week, more on the weeks that we release a complete version. So check the channel page for more stories. Link above. If you enjoyed the tale, it helps us if you let others know, so please click the like button. Subscribing will let you travel with us on future adventures, with the bell notifying you as we set off. If you want to join our band of intrepid explorers of the unknown, come visit us on Patreon. There we have a Discord server where you can share in the discussion about the stories told with both myself and the other members, and even join the book club. There will be behind the scenes content, early access content, and options to guide which stories are chosen as the membership grows. There are even tiers to get your own stories produced, and a free tier if you just want notifications and updates. YouTube memberships will follow when I have enough subscribers. If you subscribe, it will help. Please only join if you can afford to. Let me know in the comments if there are any specific stories you would like to see portrayed in this format. I'm even open to suggestions on how I can improve the content. I try and reply to every comment, so your input will not be ignored. See the description for details of the Patreon, our other social media pages, and for a link to Canje Studios to find out about Arkham horror board games. Click on the end screen to subscribe, go to the next story in the series, or to hear about the horror at Red Hook. Until next time, farewell. But remember, the oldest emotion of mankind is fear.